Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the new Lexus GX550, what has been improved, what did Toyota and Lexus do. Starting with the frame here, it's got tailor welded blanks. As far as I know, this is the only ladder frame in the industry that has tailor welded blanks, and essentially that eliminates lap welds on the frame and replaces them with butt welds. Prior to this, you had to have lap welds, which added a bunch of extra weight. Tailor welded blanks replaced that by butting a thick piece of metal to a thin piece of metal, and it eliminates the extra weight of the lap weld. So you're going to see a lot of weight reduction. And the next thing is related to tailor welding or tailor welded blanks, and essentially it's the same thing on the body panels. So this is more common across the industry. A couple other car manufacturers have tailor welded blanks in the body. So it's the same concept as before, what I was just talking about. It's going to lighten the body by eliminating the weight caused by lap welds. Again, the whole point of this, both on the frame and the body, is to connect a thick piece of metal and butt it up against a thin or lighter piece of metal, and not have a lap joint, because that lap joint takes up a lot of weight. Before, they used to lap it and pinch weld it, or use some other means. But the bottom line is they had to lap weld it, and that lap adds up over the span of the vehicle and adds a bunch of weight.
Tailor welded blanks, again, are nothing new. It's just that Toyota is going to implement a lot more of it on this Lexus GX550. Lap welds go like this, one on top of the other, and the part underneath, the lap, creates a lot of weight, and of course just adds unnecessary weight. So the laser welding can butt the two thick metal to thin metal without having a lap, and you save all that lap weight. In addition, when you make a lap, make a spot in the lap for moisture to hang out on, and that will cause a lot of corrosion if you live in the Rust Belt or anywhere where there's corrosion. So, is it this big night and day thing as far as corrosion resistance? It'll still corrode over time. However, there's going to be a lot less seams and sandwiching of sheet metal and on the frame. If you notice with the current generation GXs, they tend to rust on the ladder frame where there's a lap weld on the frame. The water sits in that lap there, and you'll see all the rust around that area. So the idea behind this fancy laser welding, even though it's not new, is to minimize weight and minimize corrosion.
So this is, again, an oversimplification. As you can see here, they're going to strengthen around the doors. This is kind of race car stuff. High-end race cars, Lotuses, seal around the door openings. They call it seam welding, to try to really get the frame really rigid, and excuse me, not the frame, the body. So this is the first time we're really seeing this on a big SUV. Now this part is really cool, and that is the if you look here, the A-frame is really far to the side, so your view is going to be increased substantially, and I'm assuming Toyota / Lexus only did that to increase the enjoyment of the ride. You're going to have a much better view. Here again, we see this tailor welded blank sort of thing. So the blue stuff is the thick steel, and it'll be attached to thinner steel for weight savings. Again, no lap welds, blah blah blah. If any of this tailor welding blank stuff doesn't make sense, it's going to save a lot of weight and really firm up the chassis here, and It may seem like a marginal thing, but when this all adds up, it's going to give such a tight, refined feel, high-end, highly refined type of feel. Now you see here they reinforced the radiator support, which on the current generation GX is kind of dinky, admittedly. So GX 4Runner, etc., that radiator support is rather thin. So as you can see here, they've beefed it up with this Taylor welded blank procedure, so they can add thicker metal. And this acts like almost like a, you know, those Hondas, they put those strut supports, you know, from side to side. It's all tying it in. So it's making this whole body less floppy, less wobbly, and more rigid. Same thing on the rear here with these rear braces. And again, this is stuff that's normally reserved for sports car world. You know, this level of refinement is rare on an SUV. So it's interesting to see Toyota really borrowing from sports cars and tightening up both the body and frame while lightening it. Okay, so what about suspension? What's new for the GX550 as far as suspension is concerned? So if you see here, the geometry, and this is an important word, geometry, the front suspension has been enhanced essentially. So Toyota and Lexus tweaked the front double A-arm setup to essentially increase or improve both on and off-road performance. So again, if you haven't figured out, this video is not about super technical stuff, but it's about what all these new features mean to you. So anyway, there's the center of the tire and there's the center of the axis, and the idea is to get them as close as possible and not cross them up. So the improvements made with this kingpin offset essentially align the center of the tire with the center of the steering axis, and it makes steering lighter and easier, and it makes off-road stability more stable insofar as when you hit little bumps and things like that, the vehicle will react more stable and more predictable. So these are little geometry things, and I'm going to rant a little bit here. The first thing people do when they get a vehicle like this is try to lift it, and all of these enhancements that Lexus engineers have spent millions to improve get thrown out the window. So in other words, once you lift your vehicle, you screw all of this up. It's not about spring heights, it's about geometry, keyword geometry. And that's exactly what Lexus is showcasing here. Their engineers put a lot of work into getting this right, making it better. And on top of that, they've tested it, and that's the big thing. They didn't just throw on springs and hope for the best, raise it up an inch or two, a 3-inch, 2-inch lift. No, this is science, meaning they're actually testing what works, what doesn't work. So keep that in mind if you plan to modify your vehicle. Okay, rant over for a second. Here's the caster trail. So they increased the caster, which means more stable straight line performance. That's what it means to you. So when you're going down the highway, the car is going to hold that straight line better, and that's going to be at the expense of cornering. But let's be honest, you don't buy a GX550 to go around twisties, mountain twisties, like you're in a Lotus or a Miata or a sports car or something. So this caster improvement is going to give you a nice stable highway feel when you're just, you know, pretty much cruising unconsciously straight down the highway. You're going to have nice stable feel. You're not going to have a wobble or anything like that. Vehicles like Jeep Wrangler are known to not be so stable going down the highway straight. This is the antithesis of that. Now in the rear here, the suspension geometry, again, keyword geometry, has been enhanced yet again. So what that means is they tighten the bolts here too, as you can see. So they increased the torque spec on all the suspension bolts, and they have found that increases rigidity, so that's a thing too. But the rear suspension has been tweaked to, again, give you better performance. There's no details on that, so we just have to, as far as the rear goes, so we just have to take it at face value that their changes made a difference. All right, now here's a big one, and it's going to go back in the rant land for a bit, because this is big. If you off-road, it's all about wheel articulation. It's not about a lift. It's not about height. You won't lose traction as long as the wheels touch the surface. And Toyota engineers know this. They've explicitly stated over and over that there's no need for lockers, there's no need for A-track or any traction aids, as long as the tires can hit the varying undulating surfaces. This is most commonly known as wheel articulation, and the goal is to maximize it. Here you can clearly see that Toyota and Lexus are completely conscientious of this critical factor when it comes to off-roading. Now, you may not think little articulation differences matter, but when you're off-road, every centimeter matters. So Lexus and Toyota have increased the articulation on the GX550 from the previous model. What does that mean to you? When you go off-road, your tires are going to have contact with the crazy surfaces. This is immediately noticeable on the current generation GX with KDSS. You feel the articulation. When KDSS disconnects the sway bar, and we'll get to that in a second, you get this crazy wheel articulation, and you're just in constant contact with the road, all while the body of the vehicle remains relatively flat. So this is the name of the game, off-road, wheel articulation, and it has been objectively increased. Lexus hasn't released any numbers as far as how many inches it's increased, but it is going to be an objective increase, so you'll be able to measure it and feel it as well.
So you may think a lot of these suspension changes aren't big, or they don't matter, they're so marginal or minuscule, what's the big deal? But if you notice here, the key word again is geometry, and Lexus knows this. It's not about a lift, it's about the geometry and the goal that Lexus is trying to accomplish here. And that is on-road and off-road, maximum on-road with maximum off-road. They want to bring those two worlds together into one. And when we talk about in a second how Lexus increased the front articulation by 4.3 inches, you're going to see that that's a big deal off-road. The kingpin stuff and the stiffness stuff that increases, and the caster stuff that increases that straight line performance and how everything reacts both on and off-road, again, adds up to that on-road world. And so we're seeing, again, Toyota's Kaizen principle, which translates into continual improvement. And we're seeing these changes really do something crazy, because an independent front suspension on a vehicle like this has always been limited compared to a solid axle vehicle like, say, a Jeep Wrangler. But with these changes, you're going to see, especially this 4.3 increase in the front that we're talking about in articulation, it really is doing something amazing here, because the reason why a lot of vehicles don't have those front axles, solid axles like a Jeep Wrangler, is because they're horrible on road. They're great off-road, but they're horrible on road. The wheel wanders, you can't keep a straight line, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Lexus adopts the independent front, and the limitation there has always been wheel articulation off-road. That independent front is great on-road, but off-road it's not good. It limits the articulation. Well, Lexus and Toyota are really, really narrowing that gap between a solid front axle and an independent front axle on and off-road, and that's the whole idea. So if there's any takeaway from all the suspension stuff, is that this is some really, really serious stuff that they're doing. They don't boast about it, they don't wave a big red flag about it, but 4.3 inches gained on the front and of articulation of the independent front suspension in a vehicle that could also track straight as an arrow because they improved the caster is really, really big.
Okay, now we're going to get into what I think is the most outstanding feature on the Lexus GX550, and that is the EKDSS system. This is where Toyota and Lexus really stand apart from the competition in the off-road world. If you don't know, KDSS is a sway bar disconnect. It's hydraulic, and it will freely disconnect the front and rear sway bar to basically give you full articulation off-road. Now, sway bar disconnects are obviously huge off-road because you want that full articulation. Well, your GX460 or 550 in this case will come with that standard, and it'll give you full articulation off-road and then firm up, as you see here, on-road when it locks the cylinders together. So what does this mean to you in the real world? Why is it so exciting? Well, again, to repeat myself, articulation is absolutely everything when you're off-roading, because you keep the tires in full contact with the road, and no other vehicle has this sort of system, this sway bar disconnect system that works this brilliantly and reliably. Yes, I know Jeep has one, but it's not as reliable or brilliant as this system. Now here's, pay attention, here's a big, look at this articulation, that's huge. Now look at this, 110 millimeter increase they are claiming here from the previous KDSS system. In other words, 110 millimeters is 4.3 inches of additional front articulation. Now the GX460 with its regular KDSS system already has ridiculous articulation front and rear. Now the front, of course, is always going to have a little bit less articulation because of the independent front suspension versus the solid rear axle. But to gain over 4 inches of articulation in the front of a vehicle like this is absolutely insane. It's getting into feeling like a Jeep Wrangler up front. You know, it's an insane increase in front wheel articulation. That's something that is going to be instantly felt. It's not a there's the measurement, look at that. You know, that is real. That's not Mickey Mouse. That's not, oh, that doesn't make a difference. Every centimeter makes a difference. 4.3 inches of additional articulation in the front is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's all automatic. You don't have to push any buttons. The car knows when you're off-road, and it will freely disconnect those sway bars. So that is game-changing. You know, I hate to sound cliche, but it's the real deal. Now, this segment coming up is going to show the old KDS versus the new KDSS system, and it's going to seem really dramatic, but it is real. Here we see on the left the guy shaking around like crazy, and people go, oh, that's exaggerating, but that's not true. 4.3 inches of additional articulation on the front. If those whoop-de-whoops that they were going through on the old KDSS model had over 4-inch difference, the new KDSS, the EKDSS model, would have kept the tires on the road. So that video of those guys in the older model shaking around all dramatic, that's true. You know, because if your wheels aren't having contact with the ground, it's going to fall back and forth to make up that difference, and then yes, they're going to fall left and right like you saw them shaking around in that video. So the new EKDSS system is absolutely mind-blowing. 4.3 inches of articulation on the front, and I'm sure there's an improvement in the rear as well.
Now, EKDSS is the best thing since sliced bread. Sway bar disconnect, but again, we're talking a lot more articulation, 4 inches. So when you see that video, that clip of the people's heads shaking side by side, people laugh at that and say that's Toyota's exaggerating. But if you're on an uneven surface without this new EKDSS, and the ups and downs are 4 inches more. The car will tip back and forth because it can't articulate and keep up with those undulations in the road. So I think 4 inches for EKDSS is absolutely amazing, and it's an absolute excellent system, and it's a vast improvement overall. Now, of course, there's other technical stuff to go along with it, and Toyota is kind of vague about what it all does and how it works, but the bottom line is over 4 more inches of front articulation, and it's just going to be great all around.
If you found this video helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you, and have a great day.